Hillary Clinton has been tested. She has seen up close what's involved in making those decisions. She's seen the consequences of things working well and things not working well. And there has never been any man or woman more qualified for this office than Hillary Clinton. Ever.
President Obama in Charlotte earlier today with Hillary Clinton vouching for his former Secretary of State. It's the first time the campaigner-in-chief and his former Secretary of State have teamed up together on the stump. But will those words of praise from President Obama be enough to convince voters that Mrs. Clinton is trustworthy? A reminder that you can join us in this conversation. Give me a call at 1-877-NEWSMAX. That's 1-877-639-7629. Now, joining us from Newsmax Washington, Democratic strategist and the founder of Trident DMG, Josh Galper. Josh, we thank you for your time tonight. And there in Charlotte, you know President Clinton, President Obama, you know Secretary of State Clinton. Was that the time for a big celebration after the announcement by FBI Director Comey earlier today?
Yes, I think it was. And actually, even larger than that, I think it's important to look at the point in time of this election and where President Obama's job approval rating is. You know, in the last 4 of the 5 last presidential campaigns since 1980, the candidate whose party is in the White House has won when the incumbent has an over 50% job approval rating. And that's where President Obama is.
And so you're saying that Mr. Obama's popularity will basically provide the coattails chronologically for Mrs. Clinton if history is any guide. But Josh, even though Hillary, and to put it in modern parlance, perhaps by my perspective, is, quote, off the hook, it's not exactly like it was carte blanche from the FBI director. He said she was extremely careless. He said, while there is no definitive proof, there is a likelihood that foreign powers had access to all of her unsecured emails. And he pointed out time after time, and let me be diplomatic about this, where Hillary insisted that there were no classified documents as part of her emails, he pointed out specifics where, in fact, there were classified documents, including top secret documents. So even though she will not be indicted, didn't he essentially offer a political indictment that Mr. Trump and others can utilize against Mrs. Clinton in this campaign?
Well, I think let's start with the conclusion, which is that he found that Mrs. Clinton did, in fact, comply with the law and that he's not going to recommend criminal charges be brought against her. You've raised a lot of things from the statement that I heard as well today. And by the way, I think you're always diplomatic about with me. But I do think that when you talk about the possibility of unauthorized access to her server, he said the possibility of it. And in any kind of situation where there is a server, there can be a possibility. It doesn't mean that it happened. And in fact, a review of her logs, which has been made public previously, showed that there wasn't an unauthorized access to it. There wasn't a hacking. And Director Comey didn't say that there was a hacking.
No, but what Director Comey did say, Josh, was that foreign powers could be so secretive that we would not have any trace of it. He said that, and others have pointed that out. So it would be a bit disingenuous to say there's no proof. Look, you got foreign powers looking for any edge. We know routinely the Chinese try to come in and hack our systems. So to think that Mrs. Clinton's unsecured information was not looked at by other nations, I think it's reasonable to say, hey, wait a minute, it probably was. Now listen, Others want to talk to you about this, Josh, and from 1-877-Newsmax and our phone line from America's heartland, Wichita, Kansas. Les is on the line. Les, I guess you have something more to talk about with this discussion. Go ahead, sir.
Well, basically, what we're talking about, is a fact, or seems to be a fact, But what he says as far as no indictment is, how about the people who sent her classified information, top secret, confidential, and those that she sent it to? They're as implicit as she is. So what we're trying to avoid, or the government's trying to avoid, is a can of worms. Who else was involved? And maybe there's some, how high up or where were involved with her.
So in other words, her aides, those who work with her in the State Department, those who are up and down the email chain, those whose last names, quite frankly, are not Clinton, might we see an ongoing investigation of those people? Josh, you've been in Washington a long time. What's your sense of this? With Hillary off the hook, does it follow that Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin and everybody else basically takes a powder in this?
So I don't think that's going to be the case, JD. The FBI has given his recommendation, and he's talked about the staff within his statement, including Mrs. Clinton. And I would also say that, it is clear to everybody about who is involved with these emails because 30,000 emails were turned over to the State Department, and more than 90% of them were already captured by State Department servers. So it's pretty clear who was on all of those emails, and that, in fact, more than 90% of her emails related to work were in fact preserved.
Well, it is curious. One of the revelations over the weekend, Huma Abedin said in her testimony that routinely Mrs. Clinton's daily schedules were burned. Now that gives me pause and cause for concern. But I tell you what, here's something I want to do because we cannot dismiss the political dimension with November elections ahead. My native state, North Carolina, Hillary and President Obama were in Charlotte earlier this afternoon. Right now in Raleigh, Donald Trump is on the stump. Here is some of what Mr. Trump had to say earlier this evening.
We've got a person in the White House that's having a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I watched him today. It's like a carnival act. A lot of fun. Moving around, he has the whole thing. Great. I'm saying this is a precedent.
So, a little bit of criticism for President Obama, perhaps because it's been interesting. President Obama overseas, out of the country, on every opportunity seems to have Donald Trump in his head, and so he has some bad things to say. I guess Mr. Trump was responding to that some tonight, Josh.
I suppose he was, but what we didn't hear in that clip, and I haven't seen the speech, but is a substantive argument about President Obama and about Hillary Clinton and what she has to offer. I think that's what we heard in great detail from the stump today in Charlotte from both Obama and Hillary.
Well, let me ask you. Obviously, you are no stranger to spin in Washington, D.C. What is the most substantive contribution of Hillary Clinton during her long time in public service as First Lady, Senator from New York, and Secretary of State? What would you give her credit for that recommends her for the presidency, Josh?
Look, I think that you've never seen a more qualified candidate, whether man or woman, for the presidency. And this is because during her long career, she has fought for children, she has fought for families, she has fought for equal pay, she's fought for a strong national security and foreign policy that protects U.S. interests abroad.
Well, let me just ask you that about equal pay. Is she fair with her pay in terms of the campaign staff or the State Department payroll, those who worked for her? Was it equal pay for equal work, even though rhetorically she calls for it? You've seen the stories.
I think when you...
You've seen the stories, the payroll, and numbers don't add up. Rhetorically is one thing, but in terms of performance, just name one thing, one substantive measure that belongs to Hillary Clinton, not her resume, not her long time in Washington, not what she says on the stump. Josh, just give me one accomplishment that commends her for the presidency.
I think that her decision about in support for the Osama bin Laden raid and operation is one thing that shows that she is clearly tested, clearly prepared to be president, and is somebody who made the right decision at the right time.
Well, I appreciate that. So she was seated there in the Situation Room watching SEAL Team 6 do its job, and that commends her for that. I don't know, SEAL Team 6 was doing it, but I guess at least maybe and hopefully her email traffic was not compromised in that situation, because it turned out well. Josh, we always appreciate your time and your perspective from the other side of the aisle. Our apologies, Amy Kramer was supposed to be with us tonight but couldn't join us. But of course, I think given my background on the other side of the aisle, we were able to have an interesting conversation, advocacy as appropriate from our different perspectives. Josh, thanks to you for your time tonight from Newsmax Washington. Want to hear what you have to say tonight, and we will get your calls later on. We'll also hear from Mark Spencer about Fast and Furious guns showing up in Paris. Stay with us.